Right, where are we going to go now? How about Calverton?
Come on, let's go there. A real interesting day.
I think this will open a few people's eyes.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, thank you for inviting us down here to Calverton. You've been around here a few years, haven't you?
I have 24 years almost.
24 years. Right. In those 24 years, you've pioneered the breeding of barbel. And you and your team, you've probably put barbel into more rivers than I can even name now. Roughly, you know, how many barbel do you think you may have stocked in that time?
I have absolutely no idea, Bob.
Yeah.
I have no idea. It runs into the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands, and you're quite right. There are very few rivers now that we haven't stocked, and some of the best barbel fishing in the country really is down to fish that have started out here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've had some notable successes, haven't you? And one in particular is a fish that, who knows, may even take the British record in the very near future.
Well, we're hopeful. That
Yeah.
would be a nice thing. Would be a nice thing. A farm-reared barbel,
Yeah.
stocked out into a river, obviously fit for purpose and growing very, very quickly, and it would take the British record. That would be a feather in our cap.
And that fish is?
Well, it's the fish on the Wensum.
Yeah.
I think they call it the beast, if I'm in.
Well,
correctly.
I've seen photographs of it, and it is a bit of a beast, isn't it?
It
A
is.
wonderful fish. I mean, it's a tribute to what you do. Absolute tribute. But
I think just saying about that fish as well, I mean, the reason that fish has grown so quickly, you know, a lot of work's been done by NACA, by the Norfolk Anglers Consultative, the conservation rather, and they've done a lot of habitat work.
Yeah.
And really improved the river, and the fish wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been for the right conditions that they've created.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, what we're saying is you start with the fish and you start with well, you actually start with the habitat and then you apply the fish to it, and if the feeding's right, they're going to grow, aren't they?
There's three things really. There's water quality,
Yeah.
because obviously, you know, the fish need to be able to live. They've got to, you know, be able to sustain themselves. There's habitat, because that brings food, it brings cover, enables them to spawn, you know. And then the third thing, obviously, you know, are the fish themselves. So it's really, there are three pieces, three parts of the jigsaw,
Yeah.
to get a successful fishery.
Well, the last few weeks, Stuart and I have been watching fish that have been spawning on the swale. But you do it slightly differently here. Would you just run me through the process of how it works?
It's slightly different. I mean, we collect the brood fish from the river, and we can collect them from the Trent or wherever. There's a number of sites that we've used over the years, and then we'll bring them back to the farm here. And we can't hope to recreate conditions in the river. What we do is we gently induce the fish to spawn using a natural chemical, a natural hormone, if you like. And then once the female releases their eggs, we just gently strip the eggs, we strip the male, and the adults then go back to the river. We don't keep them, and then we hold on to the eggs, and we grow them for a year and a half, 2.5 years, before we stock them back out into the river.
So let's say, for instance, a fish in the wild lays, I mean, we know it's hundreds of thousands of eggs, but let's say it laid 100 eggs. How many of those would turn into adult barbel?
Very, very, very few. For 100 eggs, less than one.
Right.
So out of 1,000, probably still less than one. Out of 10,000 eggs that are laid, maybe one fish would become an adult.
Wow.
It's very hard to say, but you know, the attrition rate, because everything likes to eat little fish, you know, at the bottom of the food chain, or the invertebrates, or the fish predators, very few make it to adulthood.
So when you take 10,000 eggs, how many do you get survive to adulthood?
10,000 eggs, we would look, let's keep the math simple, let's say we have 100 eggs from a barbel. You know, we would expect 95% of those eggs to hatch. And once they've hatched, you know, the survival rate is very high from then on. So we'd expect to get most of them. Maybe out of the 95, 90 would come through, would begin to feed. And once you get to that stage, survival rate is very, very high.
That is phenomenal. I mean, we've been looking at fish on the farm growing on, but I mean, take it in a time scale, in a timeline, from that egg being laid and fertilised. What happens then in the next year?
Well, it takes about 12 days to hatch, and we can see those developing in the troughs. And then when the larvae hatch, I mean, they're a wonderful little ball of yolk almost, and they're blind when they first hatch as well, because the eye isn't pigmented. They don't have little dark eyes, little black eyes, the same as roach or chub or species like that. And then over a period of 5 or 6 more days, they'll gradually absorb that yolk and then begin to look for external food items. That's the crucial stage for us. That's the important bit, and it's at that stage that we start to introduce different kinds of food, and the barbel grow very, very quickly from that point
What kind of
onwards.
food is this that you'll feed them on?
It's natural food. It's Artemia. There's
Artemia.
people that keep tropical fish will be familiar with it. Brine shrimp.
Yeah.
We buy it. It looks like a little tiny grain of sand, and then we incubate it for 24 hours, and it turns into a little tiny shrimp. And the barbel, they cannot get enough of those, and it's natural food, so it's good for them.
And then you bring them along, and let's say, I don't know, how big does a barbel grow in the first year?
First year, a good barbel, we expect to get them to between 6 and 8 centimetres. That's the kind of size.
We're talking that much then?
That's natural.
Yeah.
We grow our fish at a natural pace, at a natural rate, because our fish need to go out into the wild and they need to cope with all the stress that involves.
Yeah.
We're trying to grow fish that are fit for purpose, not Frankenstein fish. We could grow them much faster than that, but they wouldn't be fit for purpose.
Yeah.
So in the first year we get them to, let's say, 8 centimetres. In the second year of growth we'll get them up to maybe 15 centimetres. There are some shoot fish that go bigger than that. I mean, there are some thugs that get to 18 centimetres. And if we grow them for an extra year on top of that, which we do very little because they take a lot of room up, we can be getting fish of 25 centimetres. And they begin to look like mum and dad at that stage.
Yeah. Because when they're young, they actually look quite different, don't they, to a normal barbel, in that they're speckled. What's that about?
Very few anglers will ever have seen that, because, I mean, when did you catch a 6-inch barbel on rod and line?
That's
you just don't see
it's
them.
a rarity, isn't it?
Same as little tiny tench. You don't catch small tench because of the way that they feed and what they feed on. These juvenile markings are there for a good purpose. It's camouflage. And you've seen the markings, and when you actually see these small fish on a gravel bed, until they move, you can't see them. So very, very effective.
When does the orange in the pelvics come in? Because, I mean, when you're actually spotting barbel, very often you can't see the fish, and then you make out the triangle, the orange triangle, don't you? Does that come later?
Yeah, it gets a bit bigger. We don't see that on the farm because we don't keep fish long enough for that. A lot of that depends on what kind of clarity of water they're living in and all the rest of it. But as you say, sometimes it's those little light-coloured fins. That's the first thing you see when you're fish spotting.
And normally at 2 years old, you're putting them back into the rivers.
Yes, it's about that sort of size, and we know that at that age and that size, they can cope with whatever is going to be thrown at them.
Yeah, and we look at the massive boom in barbel fishing now, and without you and your team here, we wouldn't really have that, would we?
Certainly there are a lot of fisheries that have barbel in them now that didn't have them in before, or that such low numbers, or that weren't reproducing, and by stocking the fish, it's a great fishery. They're a great fish, barbel. They really are, and they will make a living anywhere. They'll make a living in running water, they'll make a living in slow-flowing rivers, and they'll also make a living in still waters as well, if they're stocked in the right densities, and they're not stocked in ponds that already contain lots of, let's say, carp, for instance.
Just a question, can they breed in still water?
That's a good question. Personally, they are capable, well, I know that they're capable of producing eggs. Now, whether they will actually go through the motions of spawning because there's no flowing water is a difficult one. But in some of the large open gravel pits, you think about the amount of water movement there is over some of the gravel bars. I would not be surprised if they did, but I don't think it's not by preference. They certainly produce the eggs, they're capable of producing viable eggs, but if they don't decide to spawn, then coarse fish and barbel, as there are coarse fish, cyprinids, members of the carp family, have this really clever trick of being able to reabsorb the yolk. So they don't lose out on that. All they do is they decide this year we're not spawning, next year maybe, so they recycle the yolk through the liver and they invest in next year's eggs. So whenever you look at a barbel or any other cyprinid and you look at the ovary for the female, you can see lots of different years. You can see next year's eggs, the year after that, and the year after that. So they're very adapted, very specialised.
Well, I must say, today has been a total day of education for me. I've had a fabulous time, but Stuart and me, we want to go fishing. So, Alan, I'm going to say thank you very much now, and thank you to all your team, because without you, we won't be doing what we're doing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stu, I learned so much that day. What an incredible job that Alan and his team do at Calverton.